Good evening, everyone. It's another one of our Faith Through Lockdown conversations, this time with people working in education, and they're going to share their experience of that and how their faith has helped them through lockdown. So maybe, guys, you can begin by introducing yourselves. Mims, should we start with you?
Yeah, my name is Mims. I'm in my third year of teaching. I'm a primary school teacher. Normally teach a class of year one children, 30 in my class. I teach in a big Church of England school over in West End, 3 classes in each year group. So that definitely has come with its challenges in lockdown. But yeah, that is me.
Okay, Andy.
I am Andy King. I'm head teacher at a secondary school up in the north of Hampshire, up in Farnborough, called Cove School. We are a local authority school, about 1,000 students. And when I went there 6 years ago now, it was in special measures, and now we've got it to good. Hooray! But it's been quite a journey. So yeah.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Paul.
Hello, I'm Paul. I'm a science teacher. I teach in a large secondary school in Southampton. It's a Catholic school and it's a girls' school, which immediately tells you which school it is if you know the school.
Lockdown highs and lows, Mims. Why don't we start with you?
Lockdown high is that in a weird way you gain time. So you haven't got to go, well, when we weren't in school, being able to create your own timetable, I enjoyed that freedom of time. But lockdown low is that it's just been a real challenge. You know, finding out on the same day as all parents that schools were being closed and then being inundated by emails and messages minutes after the announcement is made, it was really tough. And then the fallout from that has just been huge. But I think a high would be that the team has really pulled together. As a school, you have to pull together, and we've been lucky that for the most part the whole team has done that, and that has made it easier. But I think this lockdown I have struggled, the lack of sunlight, so leaving in the morning and coming back and not really seeing the sun until the weekend. So for me, the sun doesn't exist during Monday to Friday, is quite hard. I think that does make it harder.
Yeah. Andy, what would your lockdown highs and lows be?
I think picking up from what Mim said in not seeing the sun, I think this lockdown 3, or whichever one we're on now, is a lot harder than the first one because it was during the summer. So that's quite hard. But I think for me it's been easier in some respects because I've been in work, so I've seen people and spoken to people. But I think generally the biggest problem is social isolation. I know we see people virtually like we're doing here, but I don't know, I get a sense that God has made us to be in community. We're to be together physically, not through a screen. And the biggest challenges we've encountered with children is that they're sat in front of their computers all day. Now, you might say that's great because they can sit and play games all day. But actually, they can't wait to come back and actually see people and have that sense of belonging, I think, have that sense of being a part of something rather than a bit like a TV show. You get bored after a while. And you want to be together and you know, sort of play with each other and hug each other and do all the things that kids do, kind of thing, that's there. But one of the things I think I've noticed is the level of kindness from a school perspective, because the number of cakes and chocolates that we have had through the door has done the diet no good whatsoever. But that level of kindness where parents have just said, you know, we really appreciate what you're doing, and here's 5 or 6 cakes, has just been amazing, along with the lovely emails and cards and all the rest of that. That's
Lockdown highs and lows for you, Paul.
The first lockdown in particular, I found a gain of time, like the others have said, to some extent, because you're losing out on some of the other things. And you know, on a personal level, I've learned to do new things. I learned to make cheese. Great. And I've rediscovered my love of reading. What I've really, really missed, though, is the personal contact side. It's why I went into teaching. It's why I don't particularly want to be in a leadership role as a teacher. I went into it for the personal contact, and you don't get that through a computer screen. I saw a cartoon a while back about the difference between primary school lessons and secondary school lessons via computers. And the primary school lesson, you've got kids wanting to show your pet and falling off the seat and, you know, this sort of thing. And the secondary school lesson is just blank with names and circles, and the teacher saying, is there anyone out there? Come on, someone say hello. You don't get that feedback. And I think anyone who's been in a classroom, teachers, yes, they talk a lot, of course they do. But actually, what they live for is the feedback, what they get back from the kids, and we don't get that via a computer screen. And that's been incredibly hard to deal with in many ways.
What are the biggest challenges, do you think, in teaching at the moment?
I think with the sudden changes, I think certainly at our school, our experience was that parents seemed to think that we had a 5-hour warning of what was going to be announced, and so you'd have all the answers, but we didn't. And so you felt that you were doing them a disservice of saying, oh, I'm sorry, I really don't know what the answer to your question is, when actually we were doing the best that we could with the information that we had got at that time. And obviously guidance coming out a long time after the announcement didn't really help anybody's stress levels or reassuring the parents. So I think that was a real challenge.
So it just led to uncertainty and confusion, and as a consequence, basically stress for everyone concerned.
Yeah, and I think we're much more accessible as teachers now, with emails and having online platforms where you're communicating with parents and children, which is great and has lots of positives and strengths to it. But it makes it hard to switch off. So in those times where, you know, you have a 5 o'clock announcement, you will have messages and emails pinging in at 8, 9, 10. I've had some at 1 o'clock in the morning. Obviously, I don't see them at that time, but my heart breaks for those parents because that's when they're thinking about it, and I want to help them in the best way that I can. But if I don't have the information, you feel like you're just putting a pause on it, but you want to help them out in the best way possible. I've gone back, so I am back at school full time with key workers and vulnerable children. And I think another real struggle is, I think there was a misconception at the beginning of schools being closed, and actually they're really not. At my school, every single teacher is in, 50 plus adults there. I have ranging 12 to 15 kids in every single day. And that is key worker vulnerable, and I could quite easily take more because that quite a few of my class fall into the categories of key worker and vulnerable, and which was added on to from the first lockdown. And so with that, there's been a huge uproar from parents. Oh, well, why have you picked that child and not my child? And it's really hard because, yes, I'd love to have all 30 of them in. Of course I would. I think it's not an ideal situation in any stretch of the imagination. But I'm doing the best that I can to help the parents teach from home, with all the lovely videoing of teaching inputs that I'm doing. But it's hard. And so, yeah, the idea of schools being closed, they are far from closed. We're pretty much open as normal. And I think there was this idea of, oh, well, teachers are just sat at home and maybe twice a week making some resources and marking work as and when it comes in. But I think, if anything, my workload has doubled because I'm teaching a normal school day, marking work when it comes in, if it does, calling parents, video calling children during the school day, creating resources. So it's a full-time job, but arguably 2 full-time jobs, because you're doing the school day bit and then the home learning side of it.
So the big tension is you're effectively doing both. You are both teaching and doing home learning at the same time.
Yeah, Yeah, and that's the role, and we've had to adjust, and that's absolutely fine. But the job has changed enormously. You're not just educating children, you're helping parents, you're counselling parents, you're or sometimes therapists. I've on phone calls, I've had parents in tears with me, and it just breaks my heart that I cannot do any more than what I am. And that you feel like you're really letting them down, and that's a horrible position to be in. But the job role of just teacher, it is so much more than I think people realize. So I think that's probably, yeah.
So what's the biggest challenge in leadership in schools, Andy? I mean, there are always big challenges, but particularly in lockdown 3.
I think it's picking up on both what Paul and Mim said in terms of it's the last minute nature of the information, and then having to get that information quite often from the BBC website is probably the best educational website to get your latest news from. Disseminate that really, really quickly and clearly to parents and stakeholders, and change the systems or adapt the systems in the school. So with all the worries that go around that in terms of, what a year 11 is going to do, what their exams going to look like, the year 9 options and how are they going to choose their options for next year, as well as managing expectations of parents and all the rest of it. It's a bit different in secondary school because we've got about 80 children in at the moment, and a third of the staff that come in on a rota. So we're very much kept our teaching staff teaching the full timetable online. So they literally sit in their classrooms or at home and do their 5-period day and tutor times in the morning and work through teams, whereas the support staff then are looking after the vulnerables and key worker children in separate areas in the school. But it's even things like, we had to instigate mass testing and the logistics of trying to test 1,000 children with no resources other than these boxes of testing kits that happened to arrive one day. Fortunately, we then went into lockdown. So it alleviated the problem in terms of we've only got 80 children and about 40 staff in at any one time. So it becomes a manageable situation. But to scale that up to 1,000 children, when you need a minimum of 13 staff to manage at that, plus the room, plus the equipment, it's just not happening. But I think the biggest challenge as well has been the media, to be honest, the negative nature of the media, and it's almost like this, I don't know, this kind of futile state that it has. We're all doomed, and we're not. And the resilience of people is phenomenal. That is out there, and there's lots of, yes, it's a very serious situation, and we've had to manage people that have died and passed away through this situation, and it's been very, very sad. It brings it very much home. That it's not the media anymore, it's somebody's gran or uncle or mum and dad even who just live up the road. So that's been quite hard. But what parents are looking for, they're still looking for that structure and that clarity, and what you're doing. We feel safe. So we do quite a lot of bulletins, almost reinforcing what has already been out there, but in a very positive in a very positive way. But it's also trying to take the fear out of the situation for people, as well as respect the situation that we're in. And it's that balance between, we've got to take this seriously, and you've got to follow the rules, which is one battle, because children don't. They don't social distance and they don't wear masks, and that's actually modelled by quite a few adults as well. So there's that side of things. But also trying to say to people, look, don't panic, don't worry, don't have that fear. Trust us, follow the rules, trust us, and we'll kind of get through this together. It's that constant challenge of, you've now got information, like Mim said, at 5 o'clock, and parents at 5:05 want all the answers. And sometimes you're reading it after the parents have read it, because you're not constantly on these websites to look at it. And I just wish there was more of a dialogue in the background of potentially what could be done. So at least we got some idea of where the next steps are going to be.
Yeah, because I think when you don't have that information to hand, it doesn't help stop the stress. It doesn't help the stress levels of everybody involved. And so the parents have really, you know, valid questions like, how is this going to work? Well, great question. Not quite sure, but it doesn't help the situation. And yeah, they have very valid questions, but you're totally unequipped to answer them.
There were some challenges that, sorry, Paul.
I was going to say, it leads to all sorts of frustrations on both sides. They're asking the sensible questions, and you can't give them the answers yet. And they quite rightly think, well, you're the professional, you should be able to answer.
Yeah.
We will, but give us a day or two.
Yeah.
Really what it is.
Yeah.
I think there were some challenges that we hadn't anticipated, like so we've given away well over 100 laptops to various people, but having the various conversations, for some parents it was, well, thank you, I've now got a laptop, but I've got to choose whether I can put my heating on or whether I can power my laptop. And being a kind of, you know, middle-class Christian, that doesn't come into my mind, because we just plug them in and charge our devices. But for a parent who literally will have £10 and they're choosing, what do I do? Do I keep my children warm, or do I actually get them online and working? And being brave enough to have that conversation, because there's a pride issue around it as well. Literally just blew my mind the first time we had this coming, and said, you know, now you've told us, we can pay for your electricity bill, basically, and help you out. But we've worked quite closely with our local church, which is literally at the top of our road. So they've been incredibly helpful at working with individuals and some hard to reach families. So that's been really good.
So
yeah, I've been involved recently in taking out some support packages to some of our more vulnerable students. And basically, it's basic things like stationery so they can do their schoolwork at home. It's some non-perishable foodstuffs. Because it's a girls' school, there's sanitary products and things like that in there. And what I noticed, touching on your pride issue, Andy, was when it was a parent who answered the door when I delivered it, yes, they were grateful, but there was a sense of embarrassment there. When it was one of the kids who answered the door, their face just lit up because they were seeing a familiar person. And they were universally, all the kids were absolutely delighted to see you. The adults were grateful, but there was that embarrassment that they were in that situation. And it was just that contrast.
So how has your faith been helping you through lockdown and helping you in the world of education over the last few months?
At school, I have the nickname of Happy. So I think
There's a surprise.
So I think part of that. Sorry,
when you had to self-isolate, they just said it was very quiet.
Yeah, they did. It was very rude. But no, I have a nickname of Happy at school. So I think part of the role that my faith has had to play is just bringing some joy to that school building, because it is hard, and people do struggle, and so having the strength to listen to them, whatever people want to say, and just finding strength in God to get through the day. I've been so exhausted that my prayer and Bible time in the morning has got much smaller, but it's got to the point where I just say, God, I just need the energy to get through this day, to get through those conversations and be there for the people who need me to be there for them. Listening to worship music on the way in, having it on in my classroom in the morning, praying around my classroom, just trying to bring God into a situation where sometimes people feel really bleak, and giving them that message of hope because we you know, I believe in a God of love and joy and hope and peace, and just just trying to show a little bit of that, even when I get frustrated. And people love it at school when I get a little bit frustrated, but just kind of the idea that actually there is something bigger than this concern and fear and stress, which is all very valid, and trying not to make people feel that that's not valid, but saying that there is another side to it. So that's, but you know, the idea of being able to pray for a long time in the morning is just non-existent, because I'm finding sleep, it is very much needed. So yeah, that would be me.
Andy, how about you?
Yeah, there's a group of us been meeting on Monday. It started in the first lockdown to do Bible study for 2 hours on a Monday night. So recently we've got onto the book of Ephesians, and there's a verse in Ephesians 5 which talks about be imitators of God. It's a real challenging verse when you think, you know, when you look at the life of Jesus and how he reacted, and yes, he did get angry at people and he was upset with people and he did love people, but there was a sense of security around him as well. And I'm not saying I'm an imitator of God, I'm like, you know, trying, but I'm a bit further on down the line. But it's like walking as children as light, and similar in my school, they talk about my bubble, my little happy bubble that I live in. So when things get out of hand, they go, that's all right, you go back into your bubble and it's all fine. And I said, my bubble's much better than your bubble. It's full of hope and love and grace and all this kind of stuff. And they laugh about it. But there's a kind of a truth to that, in that, kind of coming back to a previous question, where the world is gripped by fear. And I understand why. But the only fear we should have is fear of the Lord, kind of thing, in that gracious, loving hope that comes around there. So I don't fear the virus. I don't go around, you know, panicked about it. Yes, you know, take it seriously and do all the things that we can to help each other. But my mind and my heart and my life is filled in the hope that, well, one day I'm going to be with Jesus, and that's why I want everybody else to be in that position. So what I try to model through almost any situation, but this in particular, is that my focus is on him. So it's a simple thing that in school, when I first got to my school, everybody swore, even the staff, and swear at the children. And now you walk around, there's none. And actually, when contractors come on site and they say something, everybody looks and goes, oh, you don't swear in front of the head teacher. And I haven't actually kind of come out and said, we do not swear. But because I don't, and I challenge people when they do about why, it's kind of one of those ethos things that, you know, you just go, that's not what we do. And we show people kindness and love. And I just think that, for me, particularly the last few months, has really made me think about who I am as a Christian, who I am in Jesus, and am I being light to the people around me, or am I just this person on this planet doing this job until I retire and then I'll do something else, kind of thing. How am I affecting other people? By what I say, because I'm quite aware that sometimes I make various flippant comments, and people that know me kind of just laugh and it's fine. But actually, people that don't know you, how does that affect? And is that what Jesus would do, to use an old kind of adage that was there? So I think over the past year, I think my faith has deepened, in not just in the amount of time I can spend in prayer and in Bible study, but also with other people virtually. It's kind of become the new norm, which is a bit weird. But that kind of accountability with other people. So, you know, getting people, whether it's in small groups or even just friendship groups, and talk about Jesus, and talk about conversations, and talk about the Bible, and talk about unanswered prayer or answered prayer, and just enthuse us on that journey of how can we be light in a very secular world, where we have got to be careful with some of the things we say and some of the things we do, but we haven't got to be silent. You know, we haven't got, although we wear our masks, we can actually talk through them, and sometimes our actions talk a lot louder than the words that need to come out. But I find my mind filled with a lot more kind of Bible verses, which is a bit weird, because I was actually talking to a parent and I was quoting scripture to her. She didn't have a clue I was quoting scripture to her, and neither did I until I was about halfway through the sentence, and I kind of thought, oh,
There you go.
but that was it.
How about you, Paul? How's faith been helping you through lockdown?
One of the hard things I found is, I suppose, worry about the more vulnerable students, the ones in my tutor group in particular, that you keep an eye on subtly each morning and that sort of thing. You can just check up on them. How do you check up on those people when you don't see them, when they're not in school? And particularly during first lockdown, we weren't following a timetable, because very much we had a lot of students, and the vulnerable ones tended to fall into this category, who were restricted in their access to the internet. You know, they might be sharing an device between 3 or 4 siblings. I had one student whose the only device in the household that would access the internet were mum and dad's phones. So they had to wait until mum and dad were back from work before they could borrow a phone and actually contact the school and things like that, and log in and do any work. And that worried me. That really did worry me. And I suppose having that reassurance that actually I found myself praying for my students a lot more, and trusting that, yeah, okay, there are problems there, but we can work it out. We can pray for it. We have a fantastic community at school. It is very much a community, and people look out for each other. You know, someone will put up a request for, you know, staff to deliver parcels or whatever it is, and the list of people needed will be filled, and there'll be a waiting list within 20 minutes, half an hour, and things like that. So the community and the way people are pulling together, really, I suppose, showing God's love in very practical ways. How do we help these people? How do we help these children in our community? And it's been very much that side of things, the practical side of things, and the reassurance of being able to talk to God and just say, I'm not sure about this. And I find myself, I'm driving into school when I go in for the key worker kids or whatever, and I'll find myself talking to God in the car. You know, just like, oh, it's partly like talking to yourself, but it's not, because you're talking to someone else. And yeah, I found myself doing that more.
So just picking up on that theme of prayer, how would you encourage your brothers and sisters in Christ to pray for teachers and for other people involved in education at the moment? What are the key things that you would want people to pray?
A continued sense of teamwork within the school building, for leadership. You know, it's not an enviable job at the best of times, let alone during lockdown, when you wanted to get the children back in as soon as possible. So I definitely pray for leadership in any capacity within school buildings. And just energy. I don't know if that's just because that's where I am at the moment, but just energy to keep on doing the job that in the best way that I can and that we can, because you definitely feel the responsibility in a bigger way, because it's you're producing an education in different ways, and it's definitely being scrutinized more by parents because they're seeing it more. So yeah.
So Paul, I mean, you were talking about praying for your pupils. So it'd be good to be encouraging people to pray for those, particularly who are in those situations where they don't have access to the internet, and they might not have access to other significant things like sanitary towels. But what would your other prayer requests be?
It is for the students. Over half the classes I teach are exam classes, and the levels of anxiety there, they just don't know what's going to be happening. And you know, the year 13s they've got applications in for university, they don't know how they're going to be assessed yet, fulfill those applications in order to move on to the next stage. And there is a real danger of them with the stress, the anxiety. They're missing their friendships. people talk about, the mental health crisis, it is very, very real.
Yeah.
These children are very isolated, and you see them, they come into school on occasions and they're not observing the sort of separation, the guidelines for keeping personal space and things like that. And we have to enforce it if we can, but I can relate to why they want to just be with their friends. Children, particularly teenagers and teenage girls, are very, very sociable a lot of the time. And, one of the things I miss, we used to go into the library and you'd see piles of year sevens. There'd be a one sort of poof, and there'd be 4 or 5 sat on that, other ones sprawled around their feet having their head. So this one poof had have about 7 or 8 year sevens sprawled around it, reading books, chatting, doing each other's hair and that sort of thing. It's very much, it's a puppy pile of kids. And I can see Mims smiling in the background. She's seen that in the same library, haven't you, Mims? It is very sweet to see, and they are missing that so much.
So definitely praying for the return of school, and for pupils to be able to see one another, to rekindle friendships, about mental health, and about the desire for the kids to be back as soon as possible. Andy, from a perspective of a head teacher, what would your prayer requests be, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I'm just picking up on the mental health issue, because I was talking to a head today of a particular sixth form, and out of their, I mean, they've got a few thousand students on site, but they've had 7 suicide attempts, and actually mostly boys, who have just lost that hope, and again, it's linked to university and all that kind of stuff and what they're going to do. So it is very real in what we're going. But I think from
clarifying the exam system and how it's going to be assessed is crucial.
Yeah, I think looking at, for the people who are in leadership to have the kind of the sort of wisdom, the sort of vision to bring schools back together again when they open properly. Children have lost that social contact, and how to form a community. So to think about how the planning of that can happen, I think is quite important. And also think on the positive side of, staff have learned and children have learned a whole new set of skills from this. So how can we use those skills to enhance the future? Let's take some positives from it, because there is so much negative out there. And I know I try to generally look on the positive side of life, as it were. I've got Monty Python going in my head now.
Let's not go there, no.
Let's not go there, no. But also, like I said before, as Christians, we have the hope, we have that knowledge, we have faith, we have the truth, and we need to tell people about that, or show people that. And I think that goes for leaders in how do you bring communities together in education, particularly Christian leaders, because you have the answer. It's how you articulate that answer to a wider population is important.
So to try and summarize all of that,
sorry,
good relationship,
you asked the question.
Good relationships between home and school. We're talking about schools reopening properly and fully as soon as they can, about the culture of the school being re-established and the community of the schools being re-established, about clearer and wiser communication from all in authority over you. Should we just put it like that?
So put it like that and move on.
And also about the clarification of the exam system, and as soon as possible, what form of assessment and how that's going to happen. Would that be a good summary of prayer requests?
That's a good summary.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all. Watching that conversation with Andy, Mims and Paul Back, I was struck by a number of things. One of which is, of course, just how difficult it is to interrupt or edit any teacher when they're in full flow. Of course, as a preacher, I shouldn't dare say that. But I was most powerfully struck by the extent to which all three of them are representing God in the school communities in which they work. And he quoted Ephesians 5:1 in the older NIV translation, be imitators of God. He said that's what he's been grappling with. In the most recent NIV updated translation, it reads, follow God's example, therefore, as dearly loved children, and live a life of love. All three of them, whether it was Paul doing home deliveries and finding himself drawn to pray for his pupils much more as he's driving to work, whether it was Andy consciously bringing hope and love into a world, as he said, gripped by fear, whether it was Mims bringing God's peace, God's presence, and God's joy into the school environment, all three of them are being imitators of God. All three of them are living a life of love in their school environments, they knowing themselves to be God's dearly loved children. They were using what they'd received from God, even if for some of them prayer was being squeezed. They were using what they had received from God to bless others, to affect the atmosphere and culture of their school environments. I guess the first question to wrestle with, whether you're doing this on your own or in groups, is this: how are we following the example of God? How are we following the example of God with those we meet at the moment? How are we being imitators of God in this difficult season? How are we bringing light to those around us? How are we using what we've received to change the atmosphere and the culture around us? Perhaps a second question to wrestle with is about the right way to share our faith at the moment. I was struck by Andy's saying, knowing that sometimes we've got to be careful about what we say and how we say it, doesn't mean that we should therefore be silent. Just because it's difficult to say doesn't mean we shouldn't say it, just to pray for the right ways to do it. Are there ways in which the reality of the pandemic has actually made it harder for us to talk about faith at the moment? How can we look for opportunities to do so? How can we pray for opportunities to share our faith through lockdown? And third, I was struck by the fact that they were all having to give out so very much at the moment. After a really difficult year, they're again in that place of having to give out. Whether it was dealing with constant uncertainty, whether it was managing so many people's expectations, having something announced and then immediately getting messages, whether it was holding both students and parents who are struggling in the midst of this horrible time, the role of a teacher or a school leader is one, I think, that's especially draining at the moment. So I think I would encourage you to pray for endurance and resilience for all school staff you know, in whatever capacity. And also perhaps to talk about, whether with friends or members of your small group, how you are drawing strength and endurance from God at the moment. Maybe ask those in your group or those you know to pray for you, to pray for a fresh energy and renewed resilience, because times are about to change again, all over again. Ask them to pray for you and covenant to pray for them, that you might have the energy and the resilience and the courage that you need and that they need for this changing world. Because we're going to come out of lockdown, and again we'll be in a situation where we are planning and adjusting and pivoting all of the time for quite some months, I think. So I hope you enjoyed that second episode of Faith Through Lockdown. There'll be another one coming out next week. Thanks for listening.